Language, culture, and philosophy are foundational parts of who you are and your perception of the universe around you. What defines you is how you implement these core beliefs to your environment. And for the ethereal caste of the Tau species, we can better understand them through the actions and inaction that they have taken throughout their history. Their story starts with the origins of the species known as Tau. Comparatively, the Tau are a young Xenos race, completely unlike the other dominant races that inhabit the galaxy. Much like human history, this race began on a single planet, insignificant and unnoticed for millennia. The Tau's home planet is a temperate planet dotted with small bodies of water, but mostly scarred by vast regions of unending deserts. It would be this unremarkable place that would evolve the Tau and their various subspecies by the time of the 35th millennium. When the primitive Tau at their first encounter with man, they had mastered the use of simple tools and weapons and fire. Countless Xenos species in the galaxy would have only made it this far until the xenophobic eye of humanity had seen them. But before the planet could be cleansed and colonized by the Imperium of Man, a violent warp storm erupted around the planet. For all the dangers and destruction of the warp and its unreliable nature, it had saved this emerging race for the time being. The then minor Xenos race was effectively forgotten by humanity outside of a few exploratory records. It would be another 6,000 years before the Imperium had any further contact with the Tau. For any Xenos race existing in the galaxy for millennia without the self-righteous gaze of the race of man is a great blessing. When the Imperium had its second encounter, they found a technologically advanced empire, possessing some innovations on par with their own. The rapid elevation from a primitive species on a single planet to a spacefaring empire in only 6,000 years represented a new danger to Imperial interests. So who were these blue humanoids, and how had they advanced so quickly in a relatively short time span? Like mankind, the Tau's secret was unity. But for the Tau, this unification was not achieved slowly, but through one mysterious point of origin. The mythical-like origin story starts with the early primitive years of the Tau race. In their prehistory, they lived as nomadic tribes in the desert plains, hunting and gathering their foods. Some of these tribes eventually expanded into other environments. The Tau of the mountain grew flaps of skin and light bones that allowed them to float over the deserts on thermal drafts. The Tau of the river valleys developed agriculture and metallurgy, forming the first true settlements. Development of settlements led to the need of trade, and the wandering Tau began to negotiate and mediate between the disparate tribes, travelling up and down rivers in crude barges. The Tau that remained in the plains became strong and skillful hunters, larger and stronger than most other Tau. Over the many millennia, the Tau race had diverged into separate subspecies, heavily shaped by their environments. But at this time, unity evaded the Tau, and civil strife and war was rampant. With the onset of raiding and war, harvests were regularly disrupted, breakdowns of trade and disease ran rampant to the mostly impoverished Tau. The history records this period as Mont Tau, the Terror, or Death Age. Despite lacking a large-scale event that could earn the title of the Death Age, why do the Tau look back at this time with such contempt and judgment? Perhaps because of what was to come from the emerging Tau society, there's this need of this age of darkness as a comparison, because from this age of death would come the legends that would form the foundations of the psyche and society that became the Tau Empire, the Tau Ethereal caste. The legends tell of the first appearance of this mythical Tau Ethereals at the besieged city of Pheo Ta'an, after strange lights had appeared in the skies. The fortress city of Pheo Ta'an was under assault by the warriors from the plains. Though negotiation had been attempted, the fierce plain warriors would settle for nothing less than the annihilation of Pheo Ta'an. For 5 long years the inhabitants held off the savage assault with their thick walls. However, disease and starvation began to take their toll. As the tide of the siege turned, two mysterious Tau appeared. One made his way into the camp of the Plains Tau, exuding a quiet authority that no Tau was able to resist. Soon, the leader of the Plains warriors were persuaded to parley with the Tau of Fiutan. Similarly, the other mysterious Tau made his way deep into the fortress, and within a few short hours, the gate stood wide open, and the Tau stood ready to talk. The two Ethereals spoke of the importance of peace and understanding between all Tau. They described a greater good that each Tau must strive towards. Miraculously, both sides quickly agreed with the Ethereals, and a truce was reached. Across the land, other Ethereals emerged, each with the same quiet authority and message of harmony and unity. Within a couple of years, the Ethereals had the entire species of the Tau working together in unwavering unity and loyalty. This new breed of Tau had emerged from shadows to lead them all into a prosperous and unified future. A better future. One for the greater good. With the emergence of this new sect of Tau, the Xenos race's progress would skyrocket over the millennia. So who were these new Tau? And how did they connect to every subspecies of Tau on their planet? Well, they are called the Ethereals, and are the political and spiritual leaders of the entire Tau Empire. They resemble the fire and water castes physically, but are marked by the diamond-shaped ridge on the raised bone in the center of their foreheads. They are sometimes also found on the battlefield, providing inspiration and leadership. But most of this mysterious caste are found behind the scenes, directing and shepherding the other members of their society. For most, the Tau merely being in the area of an ethereal conjures intense feelings of respect and reverence, such as the magnitude of their presence. It was these revered Ethereals that had brought the unwavering unity to all Tau. But over the millennia, how did they do it? If you would ask the Tau Ethereals, it would be their core philosophy that was fostered in their secrecy. The greater good, or Tau-Va. The central philosophy that binds all Tau. It teaches that every sentient being is equal and has an important part in the running and betterment of Tau society. It tells its adherents to forget their unimportant quarrels and prejudices and to unite for the greater good of the rest of the entire galaxy. A suitable role in society is assigned to you, a job in which you can contribute and help others around you. Each individual is a cog in their great machine, with each piece able to drive the conglomerate further along the road of progress, as that is the only direction the Tau Ethereals and society wants to move, towards a better future. In comparison to the other races of the galaxy, the Tau have no desire to destroy another intelligent species, religion, or culture, for the greater good to them transcends these things. The greater good is akin to a state of being. Destroying other races is not desirable, as they too have potential to contribute to the greater good. For this one dream for all to live in peace and harmony with purpose is a principle that most sentient races do strive for. To live a life in misery and poverty does not help the collective. It only drains the resources. For others, a good standard of living for all is desirable. So how do the Tau bring the greater good into fruition? Under the guidance of the ethereal caste, each subspecies of Tau are divided into a caste system, assigned roles based on their unique physiology of each Tau that can bring benefits and advantages to each role of society. The fire caste compose most of the bulk of the military of the Tau. They average as tall or slightly shorter than an average human, and are generally muscular compared to the other Tau. This comes from the fire caste origin of the plains of their homeworld, where they survived as the hunters and warriors. The earth caste is composed not only of labourers and technicians, but also artisans and scientists and engineers. They are usually credited with significant leaps in technology and culture that the Tau Empire regularly enjoy. The members of the Earth caste formed the foundations upon which the Tau Empire was built. The inhabitants of this caste are generally short and stout of build. The Water caste is primarily composed of the Tau merchants and diplomats. They are tasked with seeking and maintaining diplomatic relations, as well as maintaining communication and cooperation between all of the other castes. The Water castes are generally taller and slimmer than other Tau, and favour social skills over confrontation and combat in achieving their goals. They are more capable in communicating in the various languages of other intelligent races, more than most other Tau. However, they have the most difficult task of all, in bringing the greater good to the wider galaxy and other Xenos species. The air caste of the Tau function not only as messengers, but also as the bulk of the Tau's navy. The Tau of the air caste are even taller and more slender than the Water caste, with long, skinny appendages and hollow bones. These traits are attributed to their lives mostly in low, zero-gravity starships and space stations. Their unique physiology compared to most Tau has slightly become a crutch, as their skeletons have atrophied to the point where injury and broken bones are commonplace whenever they spend time in gravity-heavy environments. In the time before, in the Mont Ta'au, the air caste had membranes stretching between their limbs and allowed them to glide on the air currents. With the last caste, the Ethereals are the governors, and guide all Tau in this unifying way of life known as the greater good. We as humans may digest this system in the reflective real-world political system of communism. Surprisingly, many see the greater good as the opposite, as unlike real-world theoretical communism, which is centered around each person being fairly equal and breaking down class boundaries, the greater good is focused around the individual being lesser. The ideals of communism is designed to empower, and the ideal of the greater good diminishes self-importance, as the collective is more important than the individual. The individual must sacrifice everything that they have for the greater good. A society run on self-sacrifice and unwavering dedication toward its own betterment is perfection to the Ethereals, and all under the branch of the Empire do live in comparatively peaceful and good lives. To them, self-sacrifice and unity is a gift to the universe, something meant to be shared with others, a form of salvation that they would bring to all Xenos of the galaxy, whether they liked it or not. With this unified society and dedication to the greater good, the Tau Ethereals guided the Tau to spread it to the universe. If only they could convince all sentient beings of the right path towards a better and more harmonious galaxy. This kicked off the period in Tau history known as the Spheres of Expansion. This was a dynamic period that saw the Tau rapidly take from their homeworld of Ta'au to the stars and incorporate and colonize. Losses amongst the initial colonists were high, but under the protection of the Fire caste, the expansion snowballed. During this period, the nascent Tau Empire assimilated their first Xenos cultures under the guidance of the Ethereals, the Thraxians, the Niskar, the Kroot, and several others. The Orcs were a notable exception, for these savage green skins giving the Tau their first experience of a full-scale intergalactic war. To their surprise, they found that the Orcs could not be reasoned with or understand, let alone serve the greater good. One of the most notable Xenos species was the Kroot, that would become heavily intertwined with this emerging empire. Upon the Tau's first encounter with the savage species that they saw as the Kroot, they were embroiled in a brutal war with the Orcs. In order to combat these Orcs who occupied many of the Kroot's core worlds, the Kroot agreed to establish an alliance between the Tau Empire in the late M38 Within a decade of their first battles side by side, known as the War in the Place of Union, the Tau and Kroot had jointly liberated the Kroot from the brutal Greenskins. Since then, the Kroot core worlds have fought loyally for the Empire and for the greater good, provided they received sufficient payment. The primeval aggression of the Kroot make them effective shock troops, though their savage practices are viewed with disdain by their Tau allies. The habits of the Kroot are still tolerated, at least so long as they don't eat their fellow fallen Tau warriors. The Kroot did clearly not completely comprehend the philosophy of the greater good, at least not to the same unquestioning degree as the race of Tau. But nevertheless, they could still follow much of its tenets, and had a place that they could serve in this society. After the Empire's great successes, they consolidated, and once again pushed out an expansion to even further, more distant worlds. This period of Tau history is characterized by their first ventures across the Damocles Gulf. Several holdings were established on the far side, and numerous local powers brought into the Tau's fold by conquest or vassalization. Unfortunately for the Tau, this has brought them into contact with the worlds of the Imperium of Man, and the Xenos race of mankind. The Imperium was a galactic-wide power, the scale of whom the Tau were then ignorant. Like a number of Xenos races before, the Tau Ethereals found that some of the Gwei Vassar, or humans, could be made to see the wisdom of the greater good. When they encountered the Imperium, this must have been hard to believe, considering the religious zealotry that was common amongst humans. But much like with the existence of the early ununited Tau, this society was rife with violence, corruption, and harsh poverty. The billions of humans that lived under the foot of an uncaring Imperium could be convinced to join a collective society that would value their life, as they helped to work towards the path of the greater good. With the Tau encountering a myriad of different Xenos cultures and philosophies, the strength in their own beliefs only increased. Seeing the squalor and disunity of the other Xenos races they encountered, the Ethereal caste only compounded the idea that they had the duty to spread their philosophy to all of the Xenos races for their own good. As the Tau continued their expansions under the Ethereal's guidance and wisdom, many individuals of the Ethereal caste became intensely revered. Most notably was Aun'va, Ethereal Supreme of the Tau Ethereal caste and head of the state of the Tau Empire. He was an almost religious figure of awe for all Tau, and was known as the master of the undying spirit to his people. He was said to be the oldest of the current Ethereals, and it was easy to see his effect on the rapid expansion of the Tau Empire in the 41st millennium. He sat upon the highest councils, governing not just each of the Tau septs, but also the entire empire as a whole. In his capacity as the Tau head of state, he has counseled the greatest leaders of the Tau for the longer than any can recall, and his hand has been seen at work behind much of the recent Tau history, particularly in the second and third sphere of expansion. He was the most senior ethereal upon the Tau's homeworld and capital of Tau. His word was heeded by every member of his caste, for his counsel had proven ever wise and true. Whilst the ethereal castes were the creators of the greater good and the governing bodies of the Tau Empire, they were not simply just spiritual leaders, but right there on the front lines of the ever-increasing Tau Empire. Like for many Ethereals and Aun'va, there are many instances of him leading the Tau expansions from the very beginning of their conquests. I imagine that unlike the compliant Tau race, many Xenos worlds had numerous reservations of joining the expanding empire. But conversing with many Ethereals, and one such as Aun'va, you could see the wisdom and compassion that they spread. To be given the idea of a good life in the service of a positive force, told by leaders that actually cared for the lives of their citizens in the galaxy, it's not hard to see how these beings were able to add numerous species to the greater good. With the encounters and incorporation of other Xenos species into the plan of the greater good, it had started to become more suspicious just how completely unwavering the Tau species' loyalty was. The Tau Ethereals had bought the plan of the greater good, and it seemed that all of the Tau species willingly adhered to it. But perhaps cracks were beginning to show in this seemingly perfect societal doctrine. I'm sure that many Xenos auxiliaries had begun to notice the Tau species would never disobey orders of an Ethereal. It seemed almost too good to be true, how the Ethereals initially managed to unite a fractured nomadic people constantly at war into a single people and military force. Not once had there been rebellion, civil unrest, or expressions of criticisms to the ideas and implementations of the greater good. As the Tau's expansions continued, this possible conspiracy would be put to the test with the legendary Tau commander Farsight. Following the Damocles Gulf Crusade, Aun'va recommended an expedition to rekindle hope and spirit within the Empire, which had been dwindling since the bloody wars against the Imperium. In the ensuing expedition, Farsight led an enormous Tau fleet across the Damocles Gulf, going into frozen stasis to avoid aging during this long trip. In the ensuing campaign on the far side of the Damocles Gulf, Farsight was initially beaten at every turn by Grog Ironteeth, an Orc war chief. A frustrated Farsight nevertheless eventually was able to defeat Grog and pursued the scattered Orc forces of the world of Arthas Moloch. There, Farsight encountered a new, terrifying foe which emerged from a mysterious portal. Beings shaped into nightmarish forms poured out of this cursed gate. It was now that Farsight was amidst this battle he gazed directly into the gate. It seemed to him that this titanic void was a rip in the fabric of reality of an unimaginable scale. Writhed within was the possibility of a trillion terrible deaths, calling out by name to him, pouring forth twisted demons upon reality. During the battle, all of Farsight's accompanying Ethereals were targeted and were hunted down by the gruesome creatures, and Farsight was only able to obtain victory thanks to discovering a mysterious blade that he used to close the portal. The experience of battling these foes and gazing into their sinister portal rattled him. He realized that there were far greater threats than the Ethereals were telling him. It must be impossible for the Ethereals not to have known. The venerated and wise leaders of the Tau were lying to him. To all of Tau. After the incident on Arthas Moloch, Farsight returned to his established holdings on the far side of the Damocles Gulf. Farsight began to secretly become highly distrustful of the Ethereal caste, coming to suspect that they may be controlling the Tau by more than simple charisma and wisdom, perhaps employing more sinister methods. With all of the Ethereal caste and the expedition dead, for the first time in Tau history, a member of these different castes questioned the Ethereal's leadership. In the aftermath of his victory, Farsight came to realize the threat of chaos, and the fact that the universe was not the orderly, rational place described in Tau philosophy. He also came to the realization that the Ethereals as a caste knew something of this, but had kept it from the Tau. Surely it was just the Ethereals are capable of making mistakes. Was the harmony of the Tau really necessary for having them be in charge? But looking back in his life, he was thinking on instances where obedience to the Ethereals may have been illogical and foolish. Worse, many of the actions taken in their presence had seemed at the time both wise and necessary, but on reflection seemed now deplorable and wrong. With the unification of the species in question, the reality of the implementation of the greater good was becoming apparent. In a conversation between a captured Ethereal and an Inquisitor of the Imperium, the true feelings of the Ethereal caste are shown. When this Ethereal is asked what happens when you find someone who doesn't want to be unified or subjugated, the Ethereal compounds the idea that this is a dark and miserable galaxy, and the greater good is the only salvation for all. Why should sentient species rail against what makes most sense in the galaxy, a functioning and unified collective? In reality, the Ethereals believe that they had the most complete and correct view of the galaxy, and they will bring it to you, whether you like it or not. Is it truly good to force your world perspective on others at the end of a blade? That those who don't fit in with the great plan are destroyed? With the path of the greater good, all Tau are born to follow one path only, never mixed with those of other castes, and as the Ethereals say, they are just here to spread this positive path to the entire galaxy. So why is Commander Farsight setting up an independent conclave without the Ethereal caste a problem? If the Farsight conclaves follow the teachings of the greater good and practice it throughout the galaxy, is this not what the Ethereals and the greater good want? The Ethereal caste to this question does not respond, because I believe that the truth is damning. That in reality, they have placed themselves at the top of all society in the greater good, because only they like it when they are in charge. Or perhaps the greater good only works with them controlling all of the unwilling people of the Tau Empire. Following the subsequent condemning of Commander Farsight, the Tau Ethereals erased all mention and reference to him in the entire Empire. He existed only in the memories of a precious few. Compounding this loss was the assassination of Aun'va during the Second Agrilian Campaign. Few know of Aun'va's fate. Instead, the Ethereal Supreme continues his duties as a hologram, with the original's personality and memories implanted into an AI-like device. The leader and the purveyor of the greater good is a puppet on the strings of the council that relied on his reputation and legend. Perhaps to the Ethereal caste, this is a method that ensures the unity of the Empire, despite its disingenuousness. With all of these seeming losses for the Tau Ethereals, they still have their duty to bring the greater good to all of the galaxy, and so a fourth sphere of expansion was put into motion. However, to the galactic east was a dead sea thanks to the High Fleet Gorgon. To the west, the Necron Saltec dynasty reigned supreme. It was at this moment of crisis that the Great Rift formed, tearing the galaxy in two. Ultimately, the Ethereal Council decided to renew the Tau's expansions with a dangerous plan. Utilizing new technologies, the Tau fleets could move at incredible speeds, and a new sphere of expansion was declared under the command of Commander Surestrike. Surestrike's armada gathered, but due to the sheer size of the fleet, disaster struck. The technology failed, creating a massive wound in real space. This rift swept across the Tau fleet, devouring it whole. The disaster was broadcast across the entire of the Tau Empire, and the Ethereals scrambled to contain all knowledge of the catastrophe. However, the Source Sphere was not completely destroyed. In their efforts to advance their space travel capabilities, the Tau's new technology had used powers of the warp. The Force Sphere now had been cast out into the tides of this cruel and incomprehensible immaterium without the safety of void shields. The Tau's fleet was torn apart by unfamiliar horrors. 3/4 of the forces were lost forever. It was at the brink of oblivion that survivors were pushed back into real space by a multi-armed entity, driving away from the gnawing horrors. Just how with Commander Farsight, denizens of the warp had appeared before the surviving Fourth Sphere's forces, leaving them to question their ethereal rulers, but how they were ignorant of this realm and its creatures. Unfortunately, like with the situation with Commander Farsight, all of the accompanying Ethereals of the Fourth Sphere were lost. With all we have seen about the personalities and goals of the Ethereals, we will now see what becomes of the Tau in their absence. Alone and trapped deep in enemy territory, without the guidance of their ethereal caste, the Fourth Sphere of Expansion survivors were on their own. But surely with the guidance of the greater good, the doctrine that makes most sense in the galaxy, the forces of the Fourth Sphere would adhere to its tenets strictly. It was only after years of isolation that the Ethereal Council finally managed to make contact once again, though now the Force Sphere was unrecognisable. What had become of the Force Sphere's auxiliaries had since become a mystery. However, there were rumours of mass expulsions and executions directed at any non-Tau within the surviving fleet. It had been theorised that this action by the Tau was initiated after their trauma of what had been encountered within the warp. They blamed their auxiliary forces for this catastrophe. The survivors of the Force Sphere earned themselves this dark reputation, with displays of brutality and xenophobia uncharacteristic of the Tau. But why blame their Xenos allies? The Tau of the Force Sphere believed that the abomination that saved them within the warp was formed from the auxiliaries' psychic perceptions of the greater good. They perceived it as a divine rather than a concept. Eventually, Commander Shadowsun and the Ethereal Council disciplined the Force Sphere's commanders with a ritual punishment known as Malak La, before they were returned to the ranks or sent back to the Empire for re-assimilation. Without the presence of the Ethereal caste, the other castes of the Tau species did not so strictly adhere to the tenets of the greater good, that when confronted with entities of the warp, they had begun to devolve back into their tribalistic origins and divisions. Once again, the atrocities and departure of the greater good's teachings were covered up by the Ethereal Council for the damage that this could cause. But as long as the Tau Empire spreads across the galaxy, maintaining the secret of the warp would become ever more challenging. Such as with the launch of the 5th sphere of expansion, led by the revered Commander Shadowsun. However, this expansion was brought to a halt several months later, when a massive Death Guard armada appeared before them and began moving towards the Star-Tide Nexus, threatening the heart of the Empire. Unlike any foe the Tau had faced before, these Guevasar, or humans, are immersed in the foul powers of the warp. This corrupting and plague-ridden force is on a scale too large to ignore, or to keep secret from its citizens of the Empire. Most importantly, the forces of chaos target the Ethereals themselves, and they need to adapt to fight chaos, but in informing the majority of the Empire of their true nature, it exposes their own lies and cover-ups, damaging the process and progress of the greater good. The Ethereal caste has done many uncomfortable things to protect the greater good, and now they would have to do even more. The expanding empire of the Tau, led by the Ethereal caste, are on an ever-increasing scale of encountering the forces of the Immaterium. The Tau themselves have no psykers whatsoever amongst their ranks, for supposedly their souls are so feeble that they barely register in the warp at all. In truth, they are largely oblivious to the malevolent forces of chaos, who in turn take no interest in the crumbs that are the Tau souls. So far, no Tau has ever been corrupted by chaos, because they themselves have no navigators. Most Tau ships cannot travel through the heart of the warp. Instead, they utilize auxiliary Xenos to travel on these remote outskirts. With all the complications of interactions with the warp, the Ethereal caste's greater good fundamental way of thinking cannot meld with the concepts of demons and gods, and most importantly, the concepts of faith. The foundations they have spread to the Tau species and the galaxy rely on everyone working together, not torn apart from the inside. For all the Ethereal's wisdom, they are probably afraid to admit to themselves that they are ignorant on the true nature and threat that chaos poses. For a leadership that relies heavily on their image as a source of unity, it would send reverberations throughout the Empire if this was known. It is this very ignorance of the universe that the Imperium of Man views as the greatest weakness, especially with their concerns of the Tau's advanced technology and AI. One of the reasons humanity was so successful at conquering large parts of the galaxy during this era of development was the artificial intelligent humanoid constructs known as the Men of Iron and Men of Stone. These powerful and intelligent robots were intended for both labor and combat and won many wars for humanity. But for some unknown reason, they turned against their masters at the end of the age of technology, sometime in the late 23rd millennium, and unleashed a terrible war upon the human worlds of the galaxy. During this ancient conflict, remembered only as the Cybernetic Revolt, both sides unleashed fearsome weapons of advanced technology. These included mechanivores and massive thinking machines capable of lifting entire continents, ripping open chasms on planetary surfaces that extended down to the world's core. The Cybernetic Revolt was eventually won by an alliance of galactic powers, some of whom may have not have been human, but at a terrible cost to life and progress. Humanity was almost completely wiped out by its own creations, seeing too late the hubris of relying too heavily on the powers of artificial intelligence. This dangerous path is where the Tau are beginning to tread. Their technology has transformed their species from their nomadic origins to a star-spanning empire, allowing them to compete with great threats such as the Imperium of Man and many other Xenos species, even maintaining unity by using an AI hologram of Aun'va, the previous head of state. For all the reverence the Ethereal caste deserve, like everyone else, they are not infallible. The Ethereal caste of the Tau have risen this civilization into an empire in the stars. On this center stage we see just how different and similar they are to other Xenos. Upon reflection, the Tau are the most open and tolerant of all intelligent species in the universe. They are the only faction that prefers to settle their differences peacefully, holding to their own values of building an unselfish society in a cooperative existence. Their tolerance also extends to themselves, as the Tau recognize that even lowly workers as being as important to the operation as the frontline warriors. If it were not for the Ethereal caste, the Tau would have likely been wiped out long ago, either by each other or the malicious gaze of humanity. In fact, many others would have suffered the same fate, such as the Kroot and a number of other Xenos species. The greater good has brought a good life to many, with benefits such as peace and security. However, the maintenance of this seemingly perfect society is where the true cracks begin to show. Life shows you that you need to tell 1,000 lies to cover one, and the lies told by the Ethereals in the protection of the greater good are damning. When the Xenos race called the Vespoids were incorporated into the Empire, they were told by the Ethereals to wear a so-called communion helm, a simple device that helped them communicate with the rest of the Tau. But behind them is the secret of forced mind control. Sometimes when Tau human planets hold the right conditions for the Tau species, they enact secret mass sterilization of the entire human population. As the Empire has spread out further, the Ethereal Council has found it harder to maintain complete control. In reaction, they have founded the Edification Corps. This new organization investigates all those in the Empire who may not be thinking the correct thoughts, or ones deviating from their interpretation of the greater good. The greater good is a positive philosophy and doctrine, but for those who don't fall so neatly in its path, the Ethereal caste deals with them, resorting to awful and cruel methods. Would you, given the choice, kill the few to save the many? What I believe taints them the most is the dark secret that Commander Farsight discovered long ago. The Tau and their subspecies in the presence of an Ethereal are fiercely loyal and understanding, because the Ethereal caste control their minds. The greater good is so strongly adhered to by the Tau because they literally have no choice. They have built a society on selflessness, but I believe the reason they control and lead it is because it comes down to power. the power to force their good intentions upon you.